So my name is Lavinia Rogers. I'm the World Language Specialist at the Maine Department of Education, and thank you for joining us for the conversation of, where are we going? I want to be completely transparent that I am doing for the first time what you guys have been doing for the last 2 weeks. So I am trying to incorporate technology or a technology tool to create some interaction for us. And so this could flop. And I just want to be completely upfront about this, that you guys are my guinea pigs. And just like you, I have been learning how to use certain technology tools to make sure that I can model for the field some practices. So while we are going to be engaging in that conversation about making sure that we are clear about what we want students to do and kind of creating transparency for them to be able to recognize when they have success in our classrooms, that I want to be transparent that we're going to look at it in a very small context, but know that it goes across like being clear in our curriculum, being clear in our unit plans, and we're going to talk a little bit at the end about like how can we look at our unit plans, look at our assessment or assignments that we're giving our students that we would have given in a regular classroom, but what do you need to do when we are confronted with remote learning or hybrid learning? And it's an important part of the conversation just because we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. So that's kind of the trajectory that we're going to go in. So I'm going to share a link in the chat box. So if you don't have the chat box open, you want to make sure that you open it. And then I'm going to ask you to if you have Zoom as a full window, to hit escape so that you can be able to see the Zoom call when you need to, but also see what is in this link that I'm sharing with you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you, or use your reaction button to just let me know if you were able to get into the Pear Deck? Awesome. Good. Okay. So what I'm going to, so you should have, I'm going to just share my screen here so that you can see it. So you're going to be kind of toggling back and forth between where you're filling in the answers and the Zoom screen. So it's going to, might be a little jarring to be kind of going back and forth between those two things. But I want you to go ahead and you should see this screen on your window. Sorry, you should see this screen. You should see this slide in your in the Pear Deck, and if you want to go ahead and just fill in your answers for that. Great, got some answers coming in already. see a couple of people talking about the eyes hurting, this screen hurting their eyes, and I completely understand. I appreciate the fact that you're taking the time today to get some to be with us, even though it does require more screen time.
Lavinia, what do we do after we type into it? Are we supposed to click somewhere?
So I actually have it set on for me to paste it, and I'm just waiting for people that just joined us, as well as a couple of people just to put their answers in. But you're absolutely right that you can set it so that the students show the pace as well, or go at their own pace, excuse me.
But how would I know if my answer went through or not?
You're all set, Andrea.
Okay, thanks.
My audio went off, so I just couldn't get where do we need it to. I'm on the presentation.
Yep, so if you can just record your answers right in the presentation,
Okay.
there should be a couple of tools to allow you to either write or draw to type in your answers. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next slide. You should have a dot that you can manipulate and get it in the general area of where you happen to be joining us from today. And I'm going to show the responses so that if you were looking on this Zoom or in your presentation, you should be able to see those.
I think it is there, somewhere over there.
Okay. And then just so that we can kind of also get a sense of the languages, you should have some, there's 3 different flags on the right-hand side. You always want to pop it in a country that speaks the language that you're teaching. We can kind of see what languages we have with us today. And just showing everybody the responses that we've gotten so far as to what languages we have represented. So it looks like we have Chinese, we have French, we have Italian, we have Spanish, which is awesome. Nice breadth of different languages. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is just to say, like, what brings you to today's session. You should have a text box that you can put your answers into. Just waiting for a couple of people to finish up their answers. So if you, the where we are going question is very much about like how do we make it clear for our kids, like why they're doing what they're doing, how they're going to do it, and what they're going to do. I also recognize that that question is really on our minds right now because we don't know what September is going to look like, or August if you're up in the county. And so I don't necessarily have an answer to be able to do that. If somebody had a crystal ball that we could see what September or August was going to look like, I think they would be making a lot of money right now. But unfortunately, we don't know that answer. And so what we're going, so to kind of get our brains activated here, we're going to take a couple of minutes, and I'm going to put, I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen right now, but I'm going to put in the chat a prompt. And so you're going to be looking at that prompt, and then there should be a link at the bottom of the screen that you're working on that will allow you to go ahead and register your answers. This is, again, my just using a piece of technology to crowdsource like what your answers would be to that question. Yep, absolutely, Andrea. Thank you. So Andrea asked if I could just clarify the prompt. What I'm asking, it's the prompt, right, that I put in the chat box and not the directions on the slide. Is that correct, Andrea? Okay. So what I'm asking you to do is to simply think of cultural practices around how we greet somebody. What does it look like in your own culture? And I let you define that as you see fit, and then in another culture, so any other culture. And you can do it in whatever language is best for you.
Sorry, one more clarification. And you said that we're posting it where the Padlet link is rather than in here.
Right, okay. Exactly. So underneath first prompt, you should see a plus sign. And if you click on that plus sign, it should allow you to pose a prompt. And if you scroll down, you'll be able to see additional plus signs. Can I give you, well, it looks like everybody's done. So if you're looking at that Padlet document, and this is, please feel free to unmute yourself for the conversation part of this. What is it that stands out to you about the responses?
I don't see anyone's responses, and I actually haven't finished mine yet.
Oh, sorry.
Did I not click on the right?
Sorry, go ahead, Andrea, and continue writing yours. I went really fast. I didn't realize that you hadn't finished. So go ahead. If you can see the responses of others, can you just give me a thumbs up? You might have to hit refresh on the Padlet, maybe. Okay.
I think one of the biggest problems now that I see, and I think now I understand, that for some of my students, their internet, I having trouble with my internet. So audio sometimes cut off, sometimes the images freeze. So now I'm like, maybe they were not lying. So they, maybe they just decide to go and take pictures with their friends and post it on Facebook because internet was not available completely to do this kind of activities for the class.
Yes, connectivity is huge, right? Just because you have a device doesn't necessarily mean that you can connect. Eunice, I know you're just joining us. I'm putting a link in the box for you.
Oh,
in the chat box.
I've been in meetings the entire morning. I just checked by coincidence. I email and say, "Oh no, I'm missing this one." Thank you for accepting me.
Yep. So what is it? So, Eunice, you'll see what we're seeing in just a minute. Josh, I love the fact that you use the Latin and to see like the Spanish and Chinese coming through. That's awesome. What is it as you scroll through people's responses? We all had the same prompt. So what is it that you see in your answers that's similar and that's different?
I think I overcomplicated your prompt. I was like ready to write like 3 more paragraphs. But I think that's something to keep in mind, that when we give our students a prompt, right? When we leave a prompt really open-ended, it can either be a way to differentiate, allowing students to write more or less depending on their levels, but it also might cause I had this sort of like panicky moment because I still didn't quite understand it even after you clarified it, just because it was such a broad prompt. So that was like a good place for me to be or a good opportunity for me to feel like a student in that moment.
Other differences or similarities that you see?
Of course, different languages.
Which might not be the case like within our classrooms, but I wanted as a way of making it accessible and just recognizing that English is not always our strongest language, or the language that we choose to participate in conversations with. But yes. Did everybody, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just, I trying to read all of them because I cannot scroll the page. So I've been kind of just put it in small. But something too that I noticed, you know, that I see people from Mexico, so we
Mhm.
have the same, I will say, tradition or culture, and then another place is just, you know, maybe instead of asking how are you doing, I see somebody mention have you eaten, you know. So it is just maybe just, yes, different culture, even in Mexico and different places. Not everybody, I don't think that everybody, you know, agreed with shaking hand and a kiss.
I think you bring up.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead, Selena. Go ahead.
I noticed that in the beginning of each one of the comments is in like a little more black on the letters. So the first comment you made is going to be like kind of like the title, and after it's not like that.
How many of you would say that, like, for your answers, or that you saw in several answers where people were talking about like the words that they use, like the language that they use to greet? There's several of them on there that does, right? Did anybody go beyond that to talk about like the customs around like what you either do physically or like that cultural competence that our students need to know? Did anybody describe those?
Where are you seeing those prompts? I mean, I enter in the presentation, but I don't see those prompts.
So on the screen where you are, and you say there should be a, it should look, and I'm just going to share my screen momentarily. I apologize.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm just, it takes me a minute to navigate all the things I have open. So you should see something that looks like this.
Yes.
Down at the bottom is a link to the Padlet, and that's where you'll see everybody's responses.
Okay. All right, I will check on that. Thank you.
No problem. So there was somebody that described the that we in Mexico that we greet each other with a kiss, right? And that's kind of like, those are the cultural practices, right, of how we're greeting. So we're recognizing that, and you guys in your responses included different types of information at the same time, right? Like some of us talked just about the language, some of us talked about the actual cultural practices that go along with greeting our students. And so my next question to you is, which of these answers meets, which of these answers are the ones that are acceptable, that you would say like, yep, I would give credit for that? Go ahead, Josh.
I guess it would depend on what level you were teaching, but I mean, these were all written by people who know the language better than our students. Yeah, I would give credit for all of them depending on what performance indicator we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree with Josh. I mean, it depends on in the level, and I missed the instruction at the beginning. But if you're just looking about the responses, and then if this is just an activity or is this an assessment, right? And then at what level are you teaching, or you're expecting the students to respond? I don't know. I mean, it's many angles to see these responses, but definitely all of them responded. That if that was the instruction, right?
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts?
Well, they're not all equally good, though. For example, there's one about the United States that is very detailed, and if that were an upper level student, I was expecting them to show mastery of a lot of different structures and cultural points. Then that would be by Andrea. That one is the one I'm talking about. Whereas mine simply says, in English we say this, in Latin we say that, you know, it doesn't delve into, well, did they shake hands? Did the ancient Romans shake hands? Or was there kissing? Which was called a basium, by the way.
And I think too that is, you know, like I wasn't even thinking, and I didn't ask for more like a on your promises in a language of your choice. Describe the cultural practices around greeting someone in your own culture and in other culture. And maybe I wasn't, you know, like for me, I thought, oh, okay, well then in my culture, this is what it is, and that was it. I didn't even ask, what do you mean? Do you want us to explain everything of this, or do you want us to just, you know, put little, you know, just shake hands, you know, kiss in the cheek, or, you know, a bow, or things like that. I don't know. I just felt like, oh, just this. I didn't even think about putting a longer explanation or a detailed explanation. Maybe I didn't read correctly.
That happens, right?
Or maybe I didn't understand the prompt.
I was thinking of a similar thing, that where I was trying to get to was some sort of a like pointing out similarities and then kind of bringing in like where a slight difference was. But I just kept being like, how do I actually structure this? So I guess I was thinking the same thing, that even though my answer was like long, it didn't exactly do what the prompt was saying. It just went into a lot of detail about one culture and not the other. And I was sort of trying to figure out from the standpoint of like measuring whether a student met the standard or not. Like where would be the point where we bring in the perspectives piece, because just pointing out like the action of a greeting or like the what you're saying doesn't technically delve into that third piece, into the perspective or like the why or the historical reason behind something.
So you guys have all brought up really good points. And I want to start here so Andrea asked for clarification, right? Which was great. But if we weren't live and given this current situation, what would it mean for me as a teacher if I had sent out this prompt to my students? What would probably happen?
In my case, I probably will, oh my goodness, I cannot think about the word, but demonstrate, maybe, depending of what I'm asking. And especially if I'm trying to use, the language in class and the student don't understand what I need, then I probably will model, this or things like that, or draw something.
I might also get a lot of emails, right? Like, what do you mean by this? And then, like, even if I clarified that, there might be like more additional follow-up questions. And so the one thing that I want us to kind of take away, and you can go back to looking at the presentation, the Pear Deck now, is I want us to talk about if you walk away with anything from this session, just like the clarity of academic expectations impacts what students are going to produce, right? And you guys alluded to this, right? Like sometimes there were really long things, sometimes there was really short pieces, but that the length didn't necessarily dictate whether or not it would have met what you were looking for. But the other thing is that you guys were all able to articulate like what it was that you wanted, like, thinking about proficiency level, thinking about like, what it would look like in various conditions, and and started to pick apart the prompt. And so what I want us to do is, hopefully what you'll get out of this is like one way to like really make sure that we're making it clear to our students what success is. So like what we're thinking in our heads and what we're going to look for in those assignments, our kids know that in advance. And so we're going to look at a process for how do we actually create those criteria for success. Okay. So on the in the Pear Deck, you should see a couple of prompts. So you're going to see prompt B, which was the prompt that you were given. You're also going to see prompt A and prompt C. And so I'm just going to ask you to circle which prompt provides clarity around what students need to be successful and how they will know that they are being successful. And we're going to talk about this. So once you make your circle, just be prepared that we're going to need to be able to talk about what it is that you decide. Thank you, Andrea.
When we choose what, I missed that part. I couldn't hear what you were asking.
So once all you need to do on the slide is make your selection. Just circle whichever prompt you think answers the question, and then we're going to talk. So you should be able to see, can you see the responses on your slide where everybody circled? No, okay, sorry, let me just share my screen. Can you see it in the Zoom? Should see a whole bunch of colors. Okay, so we clearly did not choose B, but we have quite a few people that chose A, and then it looks like we have 2 people that chose C. So what was it about A that made you think that this provides clarity, and what they needed to do and how they needed to do it, and what made you choose C?
I almost picked C because I liked the what do you call it, like the yo perspective or the I perspective checklist. But ultimately, I thought that A was more specific in each piece to including like precisely like how your answer should be structured, but also what pieces of information to bring in. And I thought it would provide more clarity because of.
Thank you, Andrea. Other thoughts?
I thought C read like big picture stuff, like yes, at the end of a unit or a lesson or period of time, these would be appropriate to share with students. This is what you will learn, or this is what we will do. But it doesn't narrow it down to instructions for today's thing enough. Like maybe they need both of, like some kind of, this is probably posted on the classroom wall, C, all the time, and then this is on the actual assignment, the A part. I'm pointing like people can see it, but you can't.
Other thoughts?
I like the C because you are pointing right here kind of a rubric, more specific things that you want the students to do, like I can do statements that can be linked to a specific points, and how are you gonna evaluate the students. And also you're doing the cultural practices. I mean, you're comparing, and the comparison is part of what we have as a standard. So I like A2 because it's underlined words, but I think prompt C, it will be the bigger picture, in my opinion.
Any other thoughts?
I chose A because I thought that it was the language that it was clear for me to understand what I needed to do. And C, B is like it was just like, okay, maybe I can just write one sentence and that's it. And C, it kind of still, I'm still going over, and it says, in a language of your choice, compare. And, but then for the criteria for success, it says, in my own culture and another's, I can compare. But then I'm like, well, I don't feel like it really, with that, is telling, because it's telling me to, in a language of your choice, compare. So it was a little bit for me difficult to understand, or I felt like I didn't really go together the whole thing, maybe. I don't know.
And that sometimes happens, right? Like when we're preparing prompts and thinking about like how we're going to assess it. To be completely transparent, there's flaws in all three of these, right? Like if you look at A, it's very much like what students need to do to be successful, right? You need to say how you would greet somebody you know, how you greet somebody that you don't know. Like you can check. I did this, I did that. But it doesn't tell you how, like in terms of like their whether or not they're going to be successful. And I want you to think back to like your own responses, right? So when Josh wrote, like, we say this in Latin and we say this in English, that did meet the prompt, right? But in terms of like what he needed to do with the language, did it meet that kind of criteria, right? And so there is nothing in prompt A that says like you should be using lists or simple sentences or multiple sentences or complex sentences that gives you a sense, that gives you that ability to differentiate or to see if they're meeting the proficiency benchmarks that you have for your course. Whereas C is a lot more vague around like what students need to do, although it gives that kind of overarching umbrella, but it is very specific about the type of language that they have to use, right? They need to use simple sentences when presenting on familiar and everyday topics. And so there's that component of it. But the other issue with C is that this is now an intermediate skill, right? When you're talking about comparing cultural practices, if you look at the actful can-do statements, it's an intermediate proficiency level skill. But is that really when we're starting to talk about creating cultural practices, right? Like those are, sorry, is that really when we're talking about greetings? Usually not. Usually we're in the novice at that point, because it's something that we talk about relatively early on in our classes. And so I share that to kind of say like there's a process to this, right? Like it doesn't come out perfectly. And even if you find something that's like really close to like what you want, as soon as you start getting student responses, you probably are going to have to tweak your prompt even more, because like that's, you know, you learn from like how your kids actually interpret what it is that you're asking them to do. So it could end up that you end up with something like this, right? And I'm not going to have you do this slide just in the interest of time, but if this was in, imagine it was not in English, that it was in the target language that you are actually teaching, right? Like having them be able to accomplish the same thing, talking about greetings, which we tend to do at the novice level, but then making it so that they're doing more of an interpretive presentation of what they know versus just like giving them a free form writing. So I offer that just as a possible example. I'm sure that you will probably find faults with it as well. And it's, again, still a work in progress. So I want give you just a minute to, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to give you a breakout room for you to kind of go in and just take a minute with a small group of people to think about, like, what is it that you're thinking of as you're kind of going through, like, creating that, providing that clarity of, like, what it is that you want students to be able to do. Like, what is it that you need to be thinking about or are thinking about as a result of this? Are there any questions about what I'm asking you to discuss as you go into the breakout rooms? No questions? Okay, so I'm going to put you into the breakout room. It's it's random, so you may end up in there with people that teach your same language. You may not. And then I'm going to give you just 3 minutes to talk. Okay, and you should be getting an invitation.
And I will write the answer in English the way I think is acceptable.
Yep. So you're getting into the mind of a student in, like, your level 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever class that you have, and I'm asking you to write it in English purely for the facilitation of the conversation afterwards. So you're still thinking of, like, what your kid would know in your language, but you're writing it in English. Does that help, Selena?
I don't see that prompt.
It should be in the Pear Deck. Sorry, the prompt. Sorry, the prompt should be in the chat box. I apologize. So it says, describe the cultural practices around greeting someone in your own culture and in another culture. feels comfortable with us just kind of looking at like what you wrote, not to pick apart your writing in English, but just to kind of like really deep dig down to figure out like what the success criteria could be.
Sorry, Lavinia, I didn't hear your question.
So I was asking who would feel comfortable with us to look at like your response so that we can not pick apart English, but just talk about what would be an acceptable answer.
You can look at mine, the Chinese one.
Okay. So if we can just scroll down to, so is the third one, is that right, Megan?
Yes, third from the top.
Okay. So again, we're not pulling it apart for like use of English or anything else grammatically, but what would we say would be an acceptable answer based on Megan's model answer? What did she include?
Oh, let me go back here. Is the third one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the third one?
Yes.
So she definitely has the comparison between two cultures. So she has both of those. And then she has like some specifics around what you would say and what you would do in US culture. And then the idea that there's like a similar piece of like a formal versus informal or close relationship versus not close. But I would want to know what people do in China that allows for that distinction. Like what piece is the similarity?
So I think you brought out three things. I captured one of them, which was compare two cultures. I missed the other two.
Oh, sorry. Am I cutting out due to internet again?
No, it's just my brain and fingers not being fast enough.
Oh, so I think what I said was that there's more specific information about the US. So we know like what people say and what people do that registers as a difference between formal and informal. But we don't have the same information for China. We just know that there's some sort of a similarity in the difference between close relationship and less close relationship.
So let's delve into the details that were provided for the US. What specific kind of details were provided?
Are you asking me or everyone?
I'm asking everybody.
What is said?
What else?
Waving, like so what you actually do with your body to signal that you're greeting.
Anything else out of the US details? There's also this sense of like that greetings might not be the same, right? So like being able to explain like why we might choose one greeting over another. So if you look in the chat, you're going to notice that there's 4 things written there. It says compare two cultures, what is said, what it looks like, why would someone choose one way of greeting over another, right? Is there anything that we would add from the description from China?
The situational aspect of greetings, which is important because in some cultures like ours, English speaking, that distinction isn't, we don't make those really hard distinctions between formal or informal or superior, talking to a superior, and that it's important or hard, I think, for English speaking kids to get their head around that sometimes, that you can't just walk up to whoever and say the same greeting like you do in English.
So I tried to capture that. I said, how does the context or situational aspect influence how we greet? Does that sound about accurate, Josh? So these are obviously like a rough draft of kind of like saying like, these are the things based on the example that Megan put out. These are what we could put as like criteria for success. Like, you know that you have been successful if you can compare two cultures, if you can articulate what is said, if you can describe what it looks like, if you can explain why someone chooses one way of greeting over another, or describe how does the context influence how we greet. Like, based on what Megan has put forward, like that she could take these 5 things that we've pulled out, put it into student-friendly language, and make it something that could become that criteria for success, so that our kids can say like, oh, I can do this, and this is how I've done it. Or, you know what, I've got everything except for this one piece, I got to go back and add that in. So I know that it is 2:04. I'm going to let you know that I did put a link to a feedback survey. If you'd like to I'd appreciate if you'd give me some feedback and let me know how I did. And I will be emailing out contact hours, but just having that kind of squished at the end, is there somebody that can kind of articulate like what steps that they would take in order to provide their students with success criteria or criteria for success, so that they know what it is that they need to do and where they're going when they're doing that assignment? So once we identified the prompt, when I gave you that prompt, what was the first thing that we had to do? Or that I had you do?
The first prompt?
The prompt that I did for the second prompt. When I gave you that second prompt, describe the cultural practices around greeting someone in your own culture and in another culture. What was the first thing that I had you do?
I don't know if I'm understanding correctly, but the first thing for me, it was kind of comparing, or, you know, the two, one culture and the other culture. Let me think, how do we greet and how the other people greet, and I'm gonna compare.
Did I have you look at the prompt as a teacher or a prompt as a student? And when we were doing this last round of writing on the Padlet, did you have to look at it from the teacher's perspective or from the student's perspective?
I've been trying, my personal, you know, I've been trying to see it from the student perspective. Mm-hmm. And you have no idea how frustrated I've been, because I've been just hearing little pieces. My internet is not working, so I kind of trying to figure out either, you know, what you're asking, mm-hmm. and I trying to go back here and there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get a bad grade.
You're doing fine, Esther.
Because
so yeah, you're doing fine. And I know this is these are one of the joys, right? Of like, and why of teaching remotely is that internet or technology is a frustration, right? Connectivity is a frustration. So when Megan wrote her response that we just looked at, was she doing it as a teacher of Chinese, or was she doing it thinking of her students who are learning Chinese?
Should I respond to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Thinking of the students learning Chinese.
Yeah, and that's the shift. Like, so it's the first step, right? Like, we have to put ourselves in our students' shoes and say, like, this is what, if my students wrote this answer, I would consider it to be acceptable. And then what did we do next when I was putting the thoughts into the chat box, the compare to cultures, what it said? What did we have to do then once we had written the response? What did we do to Megan's response?
Looked at it from a teacher point of view.
Mm-hmm. And what did we look for?
Performance, whether it matched what performance indicators we would be looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so when we found a prompt, we answer the prompt based on what we think our students would produce based on the course that they're in, based on their proficiency, right? And then we looked at it from the teacher's perspective of like, okay, so I'm looking specifically for X, Y, Z, right? In terms of like it being an acceptable answer. Now, Megan might have gone through this entire process and then been like, you know what, I got to tweak this, right? Like maybe this isn't what is most important, or maybe maybe I need to make sure like to be more specific in this particular area. And that's perfectly fine, but at least gives you that starting off point before you just like give it to kids and say like, do this. But it also makes it really clear to them like what it is that we're asking them to do. I would say one thing that we probably needed to add in is like the type of language that we would ask them to do, right? So like, is this a paragraph? Is this simple sentences? Is this, one word answers? And just being really specific about what type of language they should be producing. Because otherwise, we're going to have them using Google Translate to do whatever they think that they are being asked to do, which might not be the case.
Yes, and something that I found really frustrating about that is I would ask students to write this much, and they would use Google Translate and give me this much. And it occurred to me that they must not even be able to understand why that would, before I even read it, would clearly not be their work. I mean, they don't write that much when I let them write in English usually. So maybe I don't know. But I think there was a lot of, what do I have to do to get him to stop emailing me?
It's interesting you saying that, because I sent them a couple pictures, and one of the pictures was like a park, and it was a lot of going on things in the park. And I said, well, write 10 words of idols that you see in the picture. But I didn't write, I thought, well, I teach Spanish, so I think they will write them in Spanish. No, they did not. So they wrote 10 words, but they were not in Spanish. So it's true. I mean, you have to clarify what language do you want them to answer.
Absolutely.
Lavinia, can I ask a question a little bit off topic? We've been doing a lot of this kind of learning, us as teachers, in the past week with everything that's being offered. And I'm looking, a lot of times I learn more from how people like you are presenting than what you present, because the manner that you're presenting it makes me go, that's something I should do. What if we, like, normally at the beginning of French 1, I teach all these greetings and handshaking and classroom, like moving around the classroom.
Déjalo entrar. Déjalo entrar. Abre la puerta.
Oh, the dog. I'm thinking to scrap all that and teach computer vocabulary like click and is that something people are talking about?
I haven't heard people talking about it, but like in my own thinking, like it sounds like you do something similar to what I do, right? Like my first couple of days of class is like teaching the vocabulary that I need to make my class function, right? And in my classroom, that's, stand up, like, move here, go there, like whatever it is that they need to be able to accomplish like the activities that are coming, greetings, all those things. But here, it's much more about like being able to navigate whatever technology you have in front of them. And so I think you're spot on to say like, what are those high frequency words that my kids are going to need so that I can deliver my instructions in the target language, or tell them to be able to do something. I think you're spot on. I haven't heard people talking about it yet, but it has definitely been on my mind.
Well, the first 2 weeks I tried to replicate as best I could what I do in the classroom and where we were in the classroom. And looking back, I would have just simply cleared the decks and started new with, what is a window called in French? How do you say screen? What's a mouse? What's click? What's open? What's closed? That's what I should have been doing. And that's what I want to do in September, should we not go back to the building.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're onto something there, Josh, and that's good thinking. So thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate you guys hanging on for a little bit longer. If you are interested in kind of seeing, in reference to like what Josh was talking about, like what do you do when you get like that huge response, or what Selena was talking about was like, what do you do when you get those 10 words, but they're not in the language that you wanted? The session about recognizing growth is going to talk about strategies that you can integrate into your instruction to really have kids reflecting on what they're doing. And that session is on the 9th at 10 o'clock if you're interested in that. Awesome. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And thank you so much for participating. And please be sure to give me some feedback because I'm learning and growing too.